So here we are, sharing secrets of the soil with me, your host, Regenerative.
Welcome to this amazing genius call, everyone. We're going to go really deep on a topic that enters the health conversation at a real fundamental level, and probably so fundamental that for many people, it's not even something that you would consider or think about, because how often do we think about the farmer when we're shopping for food anywhere, really? It's very rare unless you go to an actual farmer's market. And so when we're thinking about making ourselves and our families healthier, I think this conversation is more pertinent than any in a really kind of global way, which is why I want you to meet Ray Milidoni, who is better known as Regen Ray. He's an expert in the regenerative farming world and runs Farming Secrets, which is an organization that helps educate farmers on how to transition from conventional sort of outdated farming methods like tilling across to the regenerative model, which produces and grows extremely nutrient-dense plants, which obviously then goes on to feed nutrient-dense plants to the animals that we also eat, which makes them even more nutrient-dense. And so you may or may not be aware, but much of the Earth's farmland has turned into a barren wasteland that are referred to as dirt deserts, which I'm sure Ray will touch on, something that really does threaten the ability of Mother Nature and farmers to be able to produce enough food for all of us to thrive and future generations. So irrelevant of where you are on a health journey, this conversation matters, because whether it's supplements, whether it's food, whether it's whatever it is that you're putting in your body, it fundamentally starts in the ground, in the soil. And Ray's podcast is literally called Secrets of the Soil. So we've got the right man here. So without further ado, a warm welcome to the fam, Ray. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. This is very cool. What an intro. And thank you very much for everyone's attention. Should I just jump straight into it, or?
Let's do it.
Do it. Okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen. And so Maddie's done just an amazing job sharing about my background. And these are the companies that I basically hang around with. If it's got to do with soil and digging deeper and learning about the way that soil functions, it's the Soil Learning Center, it's Farming Secrets, and the podcast Secrets of the Soil. And links will come along the way as well. But just to share our mission is for every day for us to wake up to make soils better today than they were yesterday. And it's very much about those very small steps that we can all do as nearly 8 billion people on the planet, consciously making better decisions every day. And so I like to call this power of soils, because what I didn't realize 5 years ago when I came into this industry is how important the soil was. And I haven't stopped digging since then and learning. I don't have any degrees. I'm not a PhD. I haven't done a soil biology course, but don't let that fool you, because my passion into soil has led me down pathways that most people don't get to go down. And that's because I'm not so much a specialist, but a bit more of a generalist. So I'm talking to soil lovers all around the world every day and hearing their firsthand stories and seeing farming communities basically fall apart because of big food and big pharma and big enterprises basically taking that out there. And I'm a big believer of the power of the people, and that we can bring this food sovereignty back into our power and really own it. And I always like to share a little bit of this theory here. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the golden healing, but it's known as kintsugi, and it's a Japanese word, and it's about to acknowledge that sometimes things are broken and repair them with gold. And so in Japanese culture, when something breaks, instead of being sad about it, they actually celebrate it, because they get to apply this theory of repairing it with gold and making it better than it was. And I really want to make sure that as I give any presentation, I may talk about things being broken or on the verge of collapse or change, but I think that's a blessing in disguise, and we need to celebrate that. And that's why I always make an effort to share this kind of theory in celebrating that things are broken, and sometimes we need to declare breakdown for breakthrough. So a few questions in the room, and I want this to be a little bit interactive, and feel free to use the chat. But I'm just really curious to get a bit of a feel at the start of this presentation what the word regenerative means to you. And so if you can just in the chat put like the letter R and then a colon, and then type what you think the word regenerative means to you. And while you're doing that, I just want you to just think about some of the things about what you think about when you hear the word soil, and whether you think that food can be medicine. And I think in this group, because you have Maddie by your side, you understand the importance of food and nutrition, but a lot of people have become disconnected from that. And the narrative that we want to instill is that food can be thy medicine. And so, yeah, so just pop in the chat what you think the word regenerative means to you. And that'll just give me a little bit of a feedback loop of to where you kind of are in the room. And I also am curious to know if anyone is vegetarian, vegan, or on any specific diet or food regime, just so that way I can tailor the presentation for that as well. Because one of the big things in the regenerative movement is the use of kind of animal impact or animal integration. And I want to be mindful if there is anyone who's sensitive to those type of thoughts and imagery for the presentation. So I don't know if I can still see the chat, which I should be able to. Where is the chat box? Oh yeah, here we go. We've got lots of chats. Sweet. So as the presentation goes on, just feel free to share what you think the word regenerative means to you over and over again. Generating over and over, make the soil better, sustainable. That's interesting. I like the fact that you've mentioned sustainable. We're going to touch on that as well. Cool, excellent. And I'm very big on using the Q and asking a question, because I want to make sure that this hour of power that we have together is tailored for your thoughts and theories, not just what I put on slides thinking that you might want to look at. So I'm completely happy to hijack the conversation and go exactly where we needed to go for the people in the room. Excellent. So one of my biggest tips when it comes to the regenerative movement and food and soil is that everything that we need as a toolbox is already built into us as humans. Touch, sight, taste, smell, and hearing. And so I want to make sure that we all know that we are fully equipped with every single thing that we need to make better decisions when it comes to buying food or supporting better food systems. We don't need any fancy gadgets and gizmos, and I'll touch on a couple of those in a minute, but we really do have all the senses that we were born with to make sure that we can touch food, touch soil, understand it by, seeing it, smelling it. And there are some people who have built food systems and soil systems so healthy that they are actually comfortable to taste it and touch it and eat the soil. And there's a lot of research where that eating soil might actually be good for us. So on that note, we've got all the tools we kind of need. So I want you to meet Jack and Jill. This is my little animation attempt of telling a little story of Jack and Jill. And they're very excited because they're both carrots. They're going to be consumed by us very soon. But Jack's on the left and Jill's on the right. There's no right or wrong, but Jack lives grew up in an environment that was full of pasture and mixed species. And, there was an abundance of biodiversity around. And the other one, kind of was in a bare soil, and the farmer kept turning the soil up, and it wasn't really a good life. One was grown in, compost, fertility soil and with worms. And the other one had chemicals sprayed on it and pesticides and herbicides and all chemicals that have skull and bones on the containers. And the application needs to be with HazChem suits, yet somehow it's safe for food consumption. One was hand-picked and nurtured and cared for. And the other one had a robot basically pick it out of the ground and, grade it and move it through the production line. One got to drive with our friend Pete to the farmer's market. The other one got thrown in a box and went on a plane and a bus and a train and every other form of transport, and basically was picked in Australia, processed in Indonesia, packed in the UK, and then brought back to Australia to be sold on a shelf. So a very big food mileage. But the dilemma that faces consumers is that when you go to buy Jack and Jill from the supermarket, who do you know which one's gone through which journey? And that is our biggest concern at the moment, being disconnected. So I ask you, which one would you buy? Do you know? Can you tell by the sight, the taste, the smell, the touch, or using our five senses? Or have we kind of become a bit disconnected from that? So at the moment, we don't know which one has gone through which food system. And I think that is one of the biggest key takeaways that I want to address tonight, is that in order for us to understand the food journey, and I see the comment there saying we rely on the food packaging ... And that's really interesting, because some of the most wholesome, organic, they even have this word called organic growers, don't have the money to pay for certification or for the labeling, because it is very much a pay to play kind of program. And so the packaging sometimes can be big ambiguous with like premium. What does premium mean? Natural. What is natural anymore? So marketing has always caused these systems to kind of break down. And we're worried that regenerative movement will go down the same path of getting too confusing if we don't build kind of parameters around it. And there's a big debate at the moment of whether we should certify or not certify, because certification just means that people are ticking the boxes, doesn't mean they're actually doing the right thing. There are chemicals that we use here in Australia that are banned in other parts of Australia, but fall under safe for organic usage and labeling. Farmers should have to pay extra if they aren't organic. That's right. There is a model of like, why is organic food cheaper when, you know, why isn't organic food cheaper when the other one's got chemicals and all these extra inputs? And so, Maddie made a good point before about we are what we eat. And I think that's a really important layer that, you know, there's always been that saying of you are what you eat. But the layer that I like to talk about a little bit more is that you are what you eat. And there's actually a book coming out on this at the moment. There's lots of podcasts. And if you Google you are what you eat 8, it's really important. And it is basically about following that food chain to say, if you are a meat eater and you're eating some meat or beef, what did that beef eat? And if it ate really good green grass, that might be good. But was that grass green because it was fertilized with nitrogen and synthetic fertilizers? You know, was it first grain fed and then grass finished? Or was the grass really grown in really, soil that is high in microbes and has everything it needs to be naturally green and naturally high in fertility? So following the bouncing ball to understand you are what you eat 8 basically brings you back to the plant eating the microbes that are in the soil. And we are going to get a little bit nerdy today because I geek out about soil and I'm super proud about that. And I want you to kind of take away something and not be kind of overwhelmed by maybe the words, but I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. But the microbes rule the world. And so when we have healthy soils in the microbes, then that equals healthy plants and animals. And then that equals healthy humans. And then that equals healthy planet. And what I've discovered over the many years is that the more we start focusing on how healthy soils operate and function, the rest of the chains kind of sort themselves out, and we can reverse climate change. We can put more carbon back in the soil, and we can do it at a rate that's never really been thought to be achieved before. And so we are really having a microbes conversation when we're talking about soil health. And what's really interesting is that the microbe that is in the soil is starting to get researched, and I don't know why it's taken this long, but it is actually starting to match that the microbes in the soil match the microbes in our gut biome. And there's a wonderful doctor in America called Dr. Zach Bush, and his organization is making some amazing studies around this kind of gut biome linked to the soil biome. And when we get that into balance, then that also can help with other byproducts that come from a low biome and even mental health and things like that. So the studies are showing that the biome that's around the roots of plants is absorbed by the plants. And then when we digest them is matching the same biome in our lower intestines. And what blows my mind is that we know what the soil on the moon's like, and we know what the deep oceans are like, and we're exploring Mars, yet we haven't stopped to look right below our feet and research heavily about the microbes that are by the billions in every teaspoon of really good soil. So under a microscope, this is kind of what soil looks like. And I remember I do have a microscope, and I set it up once, and I was kind of blown away even just finding some soil life in pots that are in the apartment. But what's really exciting is when you start looking at soil under a microscope, knowing that it's actually alive. You know, there's more microbes in a teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. And that's really exciting to know that when we see soil as a living organism, which it should be, then we start treating it with different empathy and different thoughts and different decisions. And that's where it leads to food as medicine. And you know, we don't have to go far in the history books to realize that most medicines were herbal at one particular point in history and not long ago. And so my grandparents still rub garlic here and cut an onion there and do all fancy things. And that's only one generation away. And yet now we don't use our food as medicine. And the couple who set up the business before me met a lot of people who used food as medicine and saw amazing, you've got to be careful because you can't use the word healing in a public concept, but, you know, people were able to manage their lives a lot better when they started eating more nutrient-dense foods. And so what is really interesting now, and this is an amazing report that was put together by Bionutrient Institute, and the link is here, and I'll share all the slides after the presentations, and the links will be there as well. But they basically have been studying over the last few decades the amount of food nutrition that has dropped. And what they've realized is grapes are the worst. So at the moment, you have to eat 15 times the amount of grapes than what you would have. I can't remember the time frame, but I think maybe it was like, I can't remember when it was, but, from years ago. So that old saying, I like to joke, but it's not really joking matter, but that old saying that an apple a day keeps the doctor away has actually now changed to 3 apples a day keeps the doctor away. So this red one here basically says the nutritional density of an apple has diminished by 1/3. So you now need to eat 3 times. And this is all linked back to the quality that food was grown in and the way that it was nurtured. So the science and the evidence and all the research is there, but for too long we were focusing on which chemical should we put on it to grow better carrots or faster carrots or more orange carrots and make the leaves green. And now we're starting to kind of speak the other way, which is very exciting. Cool. So I just want to take a breather. Any questions, any thoughts? I may be kind of moving through this fast, but if not, I'm happy to keep pushing through. But any questions at this point? Matt, all good? Thumbs up. I haven't seen if, can we have the link? Yeah, I might just actually go back up. Ooh.
Yeah, no, this is really good. I'm really loving this. And does everybody else feel like it's moving at a good pace, all making sense? Nods, amazing.
Cool.
That graphic's really cool of that nutrient variation.
The whole report, it was released in 2021, but it's from data from 2020. Amazing. I'm trying to get the guy to come on the podcast to talk a bit more deeper about this. And he's been focusing on nutrient density for a very long time. And I think my future of food is that we buy food based on the nutrition density, not by the kilo. I think that whole weight conversation of how many kilos are in the basket and the dollar per kilo is going to change. And we're starting to see that with like food shortages and, price of lettuce going through the roof. If you're going to pay $12 for a lettuce, you want to make sure it's the most nutrient dense, even though lettuce is 90% water. It's interesting to see like which foods, and even lettuce itself, if you look at this report, we need to eat 7 lettuce to get the same nutrition density. So that's really interesting. And it's just to paint a picture that there's not just one system kind of falling here, it's multiple kind of leading to the same thing. So let's talk about soil. This is where I kind of geek out, but not all soils are the same. And most people, will refer to it as dirt. And dirt is basically what we've created, 50 years onto this industrial or 70 years onto this industrial age of farming. And now we get left with this dirt, but this dirt has no enrichment to actually grow wholesome food and sustain any life. But the good news is that we can easily turn dirt back into soil. And that's what, the power of soil is proving to do. And this is what regenerative farmers all around the world are starting to realize. And there's a lot of factors that are causing this, whether it be the price of fertilizers going through the roof, shortages of some of the inputs that people would put in. Even water is a massive input when it comes to a farming system, and not having enough water means that farmers are starting to think, how can I protect the land so that way I don't have to water as much? So it's not just about, the inputs, fertilizer, synthetic, big, industry, man-made profitability stuff. It's even simple things like water. Oops. And the good news is that when we start loving our soil and nurturing it and seeing its true value, we not only get to grow amazing food, but we reduce flooding, drought, and fire. And there was evidence of this in Victoria when the fires happened just before COVID. There was a lot of organic farmers where their organic patches, just the fire went around it, and it's such a shame because those people start feeling guilty that why didn't they get affected and their neighbors did, and maybe they should have been more, on the organic, pushing the neighbors to go organic as well. So they get guilt when things like floods and fires happen and drought and they're not affected. And mental health is a massive thing in the farmer society. We revive the farmers' profitabilities and security. We recover biodiversity and in the environmental health. There's been a couple of situations where there's conservation parks that get millions of dollars to lock a fence up and turn it into a protected area. And the regenerative farmer down the road is actually introducing native birds and grasses that haven't been seen for decades into their property with $0 of funding from government and taxpayers. And you have to wonder, locking land up and calling it conservation parks, whether that's actually doing good for the environment, or whether we should let farmers go in there and start regenerating and bringing back wildlife and bringing back bugs and, even, the pests that farmers think are bad are actually there serving a purpose. And the more we spray, the more we're intervening with that natural cycle. And then we replenish water sources and cycles. And very simple things like dew that appears on the land every morning for absolutely free is sometimes enough water for farmers to, water their crops absolutely without any water rights. And then we restore the fertility of the soil. And as we mentioned before, the soil health matches our human health. And so that's why I get really excited, because this is a conversation that really connects humanity back to our food system, back to the person who's growing it, whether that is a farmer or your next door neighbor. It's not about, farmers in central, it's just about knowing where your food comes from. And the layer of bonus is that it reverses global warming, because the amount of carbon that goes back from the atmosphere into the soil can happen at rates that, are basically seen in any other form when it comes to restoring grasslands and regenerating. And I'll show you some images about this, and you'll see the transparency between what's regenerative and what's not. And so we all can, live a regenerative life, but without any education or knowing what questions to ask or how to, tell the difference between Jack and Jill, it's a little bit difficult. And that's, we've been saying in the company for a very long time, it's about being conscious consumers, knowing the questions to ask, knowing what to look for labels, understanding how marketing works, and really being able to support systems, because whenever there's a demand, there's a supply. And I do really believe in the power of the people, and the true change is going to happen from us, not from government legislation and change of policies, because we've been waiting way too long. I did mention about carbon and bringing that back into the soil. And I want to make sure that, we understand that carbon isn't really a bad thing. It is really good, because every single thing is made up of carbon. We as humans are carbon, the things we eat, the table we're on, the computer, there is carbon in absolutely everything. What we've messed up is the amount of carbon that is in the atmosphere that is causing lots of havoc. And so carbon itself is not the enemy, but CO2, which is the carbon in an oxidized form, is kind of the problem, which is reversible. And that's kind of, what's really fun. And so at the start of the slides, you saw that there was another company that I have started recently called Meta Farms, and it's all about a tree planting project. And the reason why we're doing that is because, trees and plants are the easiest way to take that carbon out of the oxygen and put it somewhere. And so most people don't really know this, but if I ask a question like, where does a tree come from? The most common answer is, from the ground. But in fact, it actually comes from the air. So what basically is the purpose of a plant or a tree? And through the magical process of photosynthesis, probably taking you back to high school, and that's the most complicated word I'm going to use ever in my presentations, because I think most people understand that photosynthesis is the process of trees using green kind of satellites to capture the energy from the sun, and also taking that CO2 from the atmosphere and turn it into carbohydrates, which are sugars that feed the microbiome in the soil. So what's actually happening under the ground, and that's what's known as carbohydrates. And there's that word carbon again, and carbon and water. So it's kind of like oxygen and O2 is water, C is carbon. So what we're doing is basically being able to feed the soil basically from thin air. But that in order for that to happen, we need trees. And unfortunately, a lot of the forests have been removed because we cleared the land to farm intensively, to run tractors through it, and be able to just have cattle and in the masses. And the banking system, I believe, is one of the biggest contributors to this, is because they wanted farmable land, quote unquote, to be cleared land. And so a lot of the trees basically got cleared out so people could get loans and more debt. And that's basically what took away a lot of the forests. And so the MetaTrees project is to replant 25,000 trees and regenerate a farm. And that's because we know that through plants and trees is the quickest way to build soil. And that's what this slide's showing, is where does soil come from? So if trees and plants help with that, well, then healthy soil is also built out of thin air. A lot of the minerals and nutrients that farmers are putting on their property, or we're putting in our gardens at home, is because we've taken away that green matter, which we call quote unquote weeds, and that's been a paradigm that I've had to change as well, is understanding that weeds is just basically a terminology of a plant not in its desired place. And that's because we want corn to be there and all of a sudden there's a weed, but that weed is actually telling us something, and it's repairing the soil. Every plant that pops up naturally is there to serve a purpose. It might be putting carbon or nitrogen or copper or something back into the soil, and that's telling us that there's a lack of something there. And so through air, we can also build healthy soils. And so this is why it's important to cover our farms and keep them with green, rotating food. And that means that sometimes things are not in season, and we can't have watermelons all year round, and avocados don't grow all year round. And that's where that conscious consumer narrative comes from, that we can play a part to say, we don't actually want non-seasoned avocados on our shelves when they're not in season, because that means that a farmer's had to force it to grow, or, maybe it's using hydroponics or using a falsified system that's keeping it away from natural. And so when we have bare soil, everything's basically being lost from evaporation, the sun's baking it and killing all that life in the soil. When we cover it with plants, that is actually working as a system where some of it's lost, but more of it's kind of going in. And that's where that regenerative curve kind of comes through. And so it is a big exchange. It's amazing that like the fungi and the bacteria that is in the soil is actually kind of trading and saying, I'm going to give you X amount of vitamin, of this particular vitamin in exchange for sugars or carbohydrates so I can survive. And there's been research in forests where that exchange can happen kilometers under the ground, where all this amazing fungi called mycorrhizal fungi is basically communicating like a big internet system under the ground. And so if we're tilling and killing it all, then turning it back to dust every year, we're basically breaking what nature's trying to build as a very strong network of systems. And so I want just that like kind of thought to be in your mind, that most people think that roots just take water up, and that's not true. Roots are there to be that exchange mechanism through the mycorrhizal fungi and through all the bacteria in the ground to basically say, hey, I want some of this and I'm going to trade you some of that. And it works so beautifully in symbiosis, they call it, where everything's just kind of working together at a net neutral zero system. And so when we keep removing all that root matter and those plants and pulling weeds up, we're actually interfering with what's meant to just work there naturally. And so roots give just as much as they take. And that kind of leads me on to this soil food web. And if you kind of want to go a little bit deeper, there's lots of research. And I popped this slide here just in case you wanted to take that down as a note. If you're really interested in how all these moving parts work together, then the soil food web is something that you can dig deeper into and understand that, the bacteria is eating the organic matter, and that's coming from plant root, and there's fungi, and there's all these other things like nematodes, and the birds are eating certain things, and animals, and it's a big system. And if we come in as a farmer or a grower and say, no, these bugs that are on the plant, I need to kill them, and we put poison, we're taking out as part of that system, and then things start collapsing, and we're also killing all the microbiome in the soil. And that's what we're basically seeing at the moment, is that, some research is saying that we only have about 60 harvests of food left, which is less than, say, 25 years. And so if we don't start removing things, we can start going backwards very, very quickly. And so if we think expensive lettuce is dangerous and bad and empty shelves, it could get worse. But I'm very hopeful that we have woken up to this very soon, and there's a big demand of farmers to do things more naturally. And this is just an image to show you what that mycorrhizal fungi can look like when it's grown in soil. And this is an illustration. Till, my business partner in Meta Farms and the Meta Trees, he's actually experimenting on his farm at the moment. And these plants were all planted at the same time 2 of them were dipped into a biostimulant, which is a natural worm juice fertilizer, and 2 of them weren't. And you can see the ones on the left have got a really big kind of like dreadlock looking root system. And that's basically saying that from the point that that seed went in the ground, it kickstarted from all that bacteria that was coated on the seed to have a root system like that just in 2 weeks. So that's a 2-week sample, and that's the difference in the root matter, just because the ones on the left were dipped in a natural worm juice kind of fertilizer that we call a biostimulant. And so that's, that's just one little sample. Imagine that, amplified across all the farms and food systems. So our soils are sick and broken, and that's what I mentioned at the start, that it's okay to acknowledge that things aren't right, and it's the way that we kind of bounce back from that. And lots of research is showing, and we just need to kind of look out the window, that our land is not functioning the way that it used to. And, you look out into a lot of these deserts, you only have to like drive through Victoria, regional Victoria, or even all parts of Australia to realize that there's absolutely no life left in those paddocks. And that's, not just from grass, but there's no bugs, there's no birds, there's nothing. And unfortunately, that's the model that we've been playing in for a while, which is known as this degenerative model, where every year more chemicals are having to be put on the farm in order to fill the gap of the deficit that isn't there naturally. And farmers are starting to realize, and even, growers, it's not just farmers, but even small landholders and people in their own garden going, why is this getting harder when all this research is trying to tell us that it should be easier, and there's all these studies. The model's sustainable, and I know someone mentioned that word before. I think if this was like 15, 20 years ago, we could have sustained a model, but a sustainable model means to keep the same. And I think we've gone too far beyond a safe space in order to sustain. So we really do need to regenerate most of the landscape, especially here in Australia. We have a huge opportunity to bring that hydration back and green our countrysides and bring back some of those more natural ways of farming and nurturing soil for the value that soil actually is. And that's what I mentioned before, that because we've degraded so many of the landscapes, if we sustain it, it just stays broken. But what we really do need to do is we are here and regenerate it back up, and then we can start talking about keeping things sustainable. And so where do we go wrong? A lot of people blame the plow. Unfortunately, the plow was invented, it was attached to an animal, and it helped people cultivate land quicker and easier. But then we just kept going and going. And now we actually have automated machinery where farmers don't even have to sit in these machineries, going around and tilling and turning life back into this dust desert bowl. And then it rains, and the research is showing that we're losing about 4 tons an acre per year. So every acre of land, 4 tons of topsoil is lost every year. And whether that be from a rain, downpour, or from wind, or just natural evaporation and movement of soil. So, it only takes one flood, and we've seen so many floods along the East Coast at the moment. All that top rich soil is just being washed away into the oceans. And along with that is all the fertilizers and other inputs that is actually then killing our reefs and all the wildlife along the way. So a lot of fish in the rivers are dying, and everyone's linking it from what they call runoff. So my business partner is Teal, T-E-A-L-E, so like the color teal. And so Teal and I are running the tree planting project. So this is a dust storm. We know a lot of the things that have happened in the past with dust storms, floods, and so forth. So that's the old paradigm. But what I'm excited is about this new view, and basically turning degraded soils back into what is regenerated. And this is a before and after. And there are just so many examples of where people have purchased a farm that's degraded and then healed it within 5 years. And I use the word heal because there's no other way of explaining how you turn something from dust that's compacted to green and growth and providing food for a community. So, most farming is degenerative, and this is what regenerative can look like. And these aren't new concepts. So Robert Rodale wrote these 7 principles of cultivating agriculture in a more spiritual way and natural way. And he passed away in 1971. So his work and a lot of the regenerative practices are leaned on these, typewritten documents. So my reason of putting this here is that this is not new concepts. Like, humans have known how to do this for a very long time, but we just haven't listened. We've trusted the big pharmaceutical companies to, create the seeds, to fertilize the seeds, and then to medicate us on the other end when we're sick and unhealthy. And so these are the principles that I kind of want to just share with you today when it comes to regenerating land and soil, is to not disturb it as much, to allow living roots to be there, to cover the soil, or we like to call it armor. You're protecting the soil by putting green cover on it, using animals to naturally fertilize, to scratch and eat bugs and be bug controls, and then increase biodiversity. And so when these systems kind of line up, we start getting to a much more magical space. So I'm just going to show some images of like what tilling can do and what not tilling can do. So a degenerative process is basically having, crops every year that you pull out and bring it back to bare soil and then plant the same thing over and over. This no-tilling system means that you have one plant that grows in the summer and another plant that grows in the winter, or you harvest for hay, or you're using it for seeds. And so you can do what's known as companion planting or syntropic farming, where you can have plants working together. The dilemma is that it's not easy for a tractor to come through here and harvest. And in New South Wales, they're actually trying to ban at the moment, which is very alarming, pick your own fruit kind of field days. So farmers are going to struggle even more to get people to come on the farm and pick their own fruit. So that's sad as well. This is bare soil where all the CO2 and all the oxygen basically gets evaporated and all the compaction happens. And then this is a cover crop where farmers are making really good progress in bringing carbon back into the soil, reversing climate change, and growing nutrient-dense food in something that looks like an oasis of vegetation that is green all year round. So you can imagine if a fire was to come in this area, it's not going to burn any of that green, juicy, wet, because not only is the top green, but the soil is high in moisture. Then you've got chemicals. And so basically farmers who are degenerative are losing all the nutrient density and all the chemicals in the soil. And then they're using machinery to basically spray it all back on and fill the gap. And then we have other farmers who are using, say, a herd of sheep to go through the orchard of apples to eat the grass, keep it neat and tidy, but also add fertility to that soil as well. It's a really closed circle economy. There's a person in America called Alan Savory. He's got an amazing TED talk, but he talks about in Zimbabwe, basically getting old desert land and then regenerating it using a large herd of animals that basically eat the grass, and their stomachs are like a manure making machine, and then obviously they excrete that at the other end, and that is really wholesome manure that has moisture, and it brings the life back into it. And this is like a cliche photo when it comes to someone doing something regeneratively, or what he's known as holistically managed grazing, is that the fence line can show the difference between what one can do and can't do. And so it just shows that a simple fence line can show what a mindset difference can do from one side of the fence and the other. And there's lots of images like this in the space where just that fence line shows the difference. It takes a bit more planning. It removes people away from feedlots. 80% of the grain grown in America actually goes to feedlots to feed animals that are sick and malnutritioned, and so the demand on the food systems needs to be reconsidered as well. And this is what I was saying before about companion planting and syntropic farming. The one on the right, there's perennials, there's different plants that grow over and over, but they're mixed species, and one's taking carbon, one's putting it back in, one's taking nitrogen, the other one's feeding that. The leaf litter falls on the ground and creates a natural compost. It's a complete effortless system. And that's what I don't understand, is when I learn more about this stuff, going, why isn't everyone doing this? And it's also in an urban setting as well. This is a vacant lot. that's just dust. But we can reshape that into something that's green and magical and a community garden, bringing people together that is, growing local food, helping feed, the less fortunate, but also dropping the temperature of that city because the greenery, drops the temperature of trees, and it could all be fruit bearing as well. So this is Alan Savory's quote. It's not drought that caused the bare ground. It's the bare ground that caused the drought. And I'd say flooding as well. I might, that's just, again, someone who's trying to grow monoculture, one crop in rows with tractors, and then someone who's growing mixed species that's just kind of working together. And I asked the question, like, which one would you like your food to come from? So that's most of the presentation. Now I'm going to give you some action items. So I'm going to share this link with you as well, because I'm sure you're going to want to see this. It is a blog on our website. But basically, these are 6 documentaries that basically changed my life. The amount of information that has kind of appeared on mainstream media now around the importance of soil and regenerating. Kiss the Ground is probably one of the first ones I'd recommend because of the fact that they focus more on the consumer and what consumers can do to buy more locally sourced food and how soil can impact that. My Biggest Little Farm is an amazing story of someone who buys a farm that, when they hit the shovel on the ground, it sounds like metal hitting metal. And within a certain time frame, they turn it into this magical oasis. And the lesson I learned from that is that one problem is solved by the next natural solution, and that there is a natural solution. They had a slug issue in their orchard. They introduced ducks. The ducks ate the slugs, and so just little things like that can solve problems. We don't have to go and throw out chemicals. David Attenborough's one basically hit the heartstrings because this is one person who in his lifetime has seen the destruction of, rainforests, and he takes us back to places that he's been when he was younger and can't believe what humans have done to that. And a scene that really stood out to me in that one was when he goes back to Chernobyl after the disaster there, and he says all you can see is life, living green life coming back. And it just proves how resilient nature can be. And doesn't matter what humans do to destroy something, nature always wins and will heal itself over time. And even though it's still not safe for humans to go there, trees are growing and plants are there and wildlife are there, and it is slowly healing itself. Fantastic Fungi is awesome to talk about mushrooms and the wonderful world of fungi. I've fallen in love. There's like mushrooms in my background. I have mushroom t-shirts that I wear now. If it's not leaves, it's mushrooms. I've fallen in love with the power of fungi and mushrooms. And then the last one that's really good is 2040. This is a documentary that is made here in Australia, and they've just released a new one, which is all about regeneration. And the last one is To Which We Belong. That is very much farmer focused, but the stories that are in that one, there were many that left me in tears. Let me just say that. So what can you do as someone who has a choice with their dollars? We can start asking better questions when we go to restaurants. They might not have the answer, but the more that people say, is this meat grown grass-fed? Or is this cheese organic? Is this wine organic? Demand creates supply. And the more that we kind of expect things to be a certain way, the more that kind of goes to the restaurant owner and says, well, how's everyone asking for organic wine? Let me go and look into that. So asking better questions, asking the farmer or the restaurant owner or the cafe owner, do they know where their food's coming from? Is it just a food company, or is it actually grown from a particular farmer down the road? Going to farmers markets is another great way of connecting back to that food system and asking questions and say, oh, I've noticed that you've got biodynamic written on this tag. What does biodynamic mean? How is that different? Asking questions and saying, hey, do you mind if I come and have a look at your farm? Anyone who grows wholesome food gets excited and proud to show that off. And they will invite you onto the farm. They'll run farm tours and they'll show you exactly how they're doing it. If their response is, oh, no, it's a biosecurity risk if people come onto my farm, I sit there going, what do you got to hide? What things in the shed might you not want people to see that you're using? And what system are you enrolling in where you can't have visitors to your property? And so most regenerative farmers that I've met, you can literally just knock on their door and they'll take you on a 3-hour farm tour. And I did that in January on a mini road trip. And I was just amazed how many farmers would open their door and take me on a tour and then offer their spare bedroom for a place to crash that night, you know? So you don't have to go physically on these farm tours. A lot of farmers are now starting to create video content, especially post-pandemic, the use of video and Zoom, and they'll take you on virtual tours. So if at any opportunity you get to go on a farm tour, it's an amazing opportunity. The other thing that I'd like to share with you as well is what's known as a CSA model, which is a community supported agriculture. It's not a subscription box. Some people think it's a subscription box, but a community supported agriculture is something that's very big in America, and more people are doing it here in Australia, but it's basically going in partnership with the farmer as a shareholder. And so some years they'll have a really good yield, other years they might not. And so there's no expectation of how much you're going to get. It's a share. Most farmers will have like a 50-way share or 100-way share. The good news is that more and more of these are popping up in Australia. The bad news is that a lot of them have like a 2 to 5 year waiting list, waiting for someone to stop their subscription so someone else can buy into it. And it started again in Japan in the 70s. So, you know, the 70s was this time in history where things changed, and the gold came off the dollar standard, or the dollar came off the gold standard. You know, big pharma, you know, food pyramid was all created and funded by certain groups. And you kind of wonder why we have a system that we have today. But community supported agriculture is definitely something that I'd love you all to kind of look into and see if there's one that you can, you know, buy shares into. And as I mentioned before, there are going to become devices and technology where you can go to the farmer's market and you can scan the food, and it's going to be able to give you the nutrient density of that food and how nutrient dense, I guess, that is. But I don't want tech to get too confusing, and I don't think we need to be, you know, walking around with shopping centers and scanning food. But I think a stepping stone is definitely if Jack and Jill had some kind of QR code and you could scan one of them on the packaging, and in the aisle you could meet, you know, Jack's farmer and know how they grew it, and go on a virtual farm tour and make a more conscious decision when it comes to food purchasing. And, you know, the thought from my point of view is, why are we labeling things that organic when we should be really labeling the poisons or the chemicals that are put on that food? So like cigarettes, we can make decisions whether we want to buy that or not. This is Roosevelt. He says, a nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. You know, again, a very old dated photo, yet we didn't listen. And a nation that rebuilds its soils can rebuild itself. So that's the kind of thought that I want to end the presentation with, and open up to any Q&As and thoughts, and happy to take the conversation wherever it needs to go.
Thanks so much, Ray. This has been super eye-opening. And I think, yeah, a lot to learn. So what I've done throughout the chat, I've collected everyone's questions.
Sure.
So I'm going to just dump them in here. And then I've got everybody's names as well. So as we hit the question, if you want to unmute and ask whatever you want and chat with Ray, go for it. So Nicole's question is first.
To be overwhelmed. It's just about planting the seed and to start digging deeper. If you're not sure about something, explore it more, you know. So Nicole, if I grow our own beetroot in compost soil, I'm guessing that my beets would be better than the 9X. Absolutely. It's all about the condition that the soil, that the food is grown in. The best life cycle for anything is if you're growing it from seed, and from the very moment that it touches the soil, it is inoculated or it is in a good environment, and it has the best life from the moment the seed is germinated. But the next best thing is grabbing seedlings, doesn't matter what grade they are, and then putting them into better soil conditions. That is going to definitely give you a better growing system. One of the worst kind of thoughts that I have is that we go down the form of factory farming, vertical gardens that is all water, hydroponics, you know, and machine calculated chemicals into the water. I think for me, food needs to touch the ground. You know, there's also you know, without getting too woo-woo, but there's an electric force in the planet, and, you know, there is the moon changes the water tables. And so all that kind of matters. It can't just be, you know, scientifically grown food. And so putting compost, worm juice, anything The other thing with compost as well is keeping all the organic matter that's in that compost as local as possible. So that's one of the big things that farmers are starting to do now, is instead of buying compost in or using biostimulants from the other side of the country, they're using companies that are making compost from local tree, companies and stuff that's coming from the local area, because it's keeping that local biome together and where it needs to be. And that's also really important as well. Emma says, how do we make a difference in our own back gardens? Having a back garden and being able to grow something is already making a huge difference. We think about the pandemic, the first things that ran out were seeds and toilet paper. And so anything that you can get growing in your own backyard. I don't have a lot of access to land, but I've got like planter boxes around, and I've, encouraging, people in a co-working space that I'm at, of how do we get a compost bin and consider about our food waste, and any little thing that you're doing in the right direction is playing a huge part. The next layer of that is learn out loud, share it. Don't be shy. Take a photo, put it on Instagram, show people that you are growing things in your own backyard. If you've got access to kids, nieces, nephews, anyone that you can bring in that garden, that's biodiversity of people. Get them playing in the mud, touching the soil, interacting with that. There's a community garden on the Central Coast in New South Wales that I hang out with, and they do nature play, and the kids are just, making mud pancakes, and then they're, making, like they're just playing in the mud, and they're painting and doing with all fun stuff. They're collecting bugs and leaf shapes and trying to identify leaves. And I think if we can encourage kids to get into that backyard as well, then that is a huge difference. But the fact that you've got your own garden, that's already a massive win. And the only thing I'd say is share out loud, show it off so people can get inspired by it. And interrupt me if you want to go deeper, and unmute yourself if you want to vibe on the question further. Deb's asked, how can the average farmer bring these soils back from the brink? It's funny you use that word. Are you familiar with Peter Andrews' book called Back from the Brink? I'm not sure. Deb? No? Okay, so there's actually a book called Back from the Brink. And Peter Andrews talks about the fact that we have applied a massive European way of farming onto an Australian landscape. And the Australian landscape operates very differently to the European style. And so what the average farmer can do is basically unfold their arms, and not, because a lot of farmers will sit there going, my grandfather did it this way and my father did it this way and I'm doing it this way. So the first thing they can do is unfold their arms and just be open to there is a different possibility and a different way. Unfortunately, what's motivated most people is the cost of fertilizers and the shortage of stuff. And so crisis normally creates change. And I just wish we could break that pattern and see that there's a preventative measure to say, this makes more sense. There's a lot of case studies. So if you know farmers and you want to kind of plant the seed, there's a company called Soils for Life, and they basically just do one case study after a case study after a case study of people who have regenerated their farm, moved to a more organic model, and they talk numbers, they talk profits, they talk hours on a tractor. Do you want to be a farmer that sits on a tractor all your life, or do you want to spend time with your family on the weekend, football and basketball matches, and have the farm and Mother Nature take care of itself? And it's a bit of an ego thing, because most farmers will talk about how many hours they sat on the tractor that week. There's not enough hours in a week to do the tractor stuff. God, I'm so busy, but it's about working smarter, and that's one of the challenges, or one of the things that Teal and I are excited about, is getting access to a farm and just regenerating and showing that you can work smarter and not harder, and add into those case studies that Soils for Life already do. So if you need to, show them a way. And it reminds me of an analogy that I once heard, which is if you've got wet wood next to a fire, the way that you let that wet wood catch the flame is to put it close enough to the fire long enough for it to dry out and then catch the flame. And so that log will ignite when it's ready and at the right time. So the same with a lot of our farmers. It's just the long game. It's planting the seeds, letting them know that they're not ready, but a lot of the time it's the husband and wife dilemma, where the wife is a little bit more nurturing and connected to nature and is telling the husband how they should do it. And that's not normally a good dynamic, So, yeah. And the movement to women in the farming industry is really big at the moment. There's a lot of tech funding around women and farming. And I think that's going to create a big change, not to play the whole gender thing, but, it is kind of more common that the female energy is more nurturing and can see the land from a caring point of view, rather than just spraying and tractors and turning and more alpha male kind of energy. So there's that kind of happening as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say about the women thing. So I grew up on a farm in Western Victoria. I live in Ballarat now, so we're not farming anymore, but my son's at Ag College in Horsham, and he's at Ag College with heaps and heaps of girls. There's a huge female influence sort of coming in, and it's just carrying on generation after generation with, you sow the crop, it grows, you harvest it, you till it up again, and you just do the same thing over and over, and you're on the tractor from dawn to dusk and into the night in the middle of summer, getting the crop off. And it's, I don't know, to sort of train, there's so many farmers and so many big corporations and companies that own these farms now, particularly, in the Riverina, all over Australia, really. It's just all about the dollars. It's just all about getting as much in the ground as you can and getting it off and making as much money out of it as you can.
Absolutely. And that's why I think power to the people. Like, imagine the day where everyone says, no, enough is enough. Unless it's organic, I'm not buying it. Like, the system will change very quickly. The big supermarkets purchased the Marco brand because it was organic and they could see that it was moving off the shelf. They didn't buy that without any data or without any understanding of what was happening. But we've got to be careful about what is labeled organic these days and what's in and what's not. And that some farmers are, there's a lot of farmers who, Ian and Di Haggerty from Western Australia, they grew regeneratively grown grain for 10 years and had to sell it to the normal commodities market because no one would divide it and say, this is regenerative grown grain and this is normal grain. So they persisted with growing regeneratively grown grain, selling it at normal market prices, losing money basically. And now they're one of the best showcases and everyone's going, how did you do it? It's that old saying that they'll call you crazy and then one day they'll say, how did you do it? And that's exactly what's happened to them. I just got goosebumps saying that. Helen and Hugo, who set up this business, did the same. They would go to ag shows and they'd get put in the corner as like the woo-woo hippie, chemical-free people. And now it's like one of the growing biggest trends of like how to go regenerative, and the word regenerative outranks the word organic on Google searches now. And documentaries like Kiss the Ground and the others that I mentioned that are helping that narrative to go, what does this word regenerative mean? And it makes sense to me. Don't we want to make the system better so it's looking after itself? It's the same as our bank accounts. We want our bank accounts to be regenerative. We want our souls to be regenerative. We want our minds, it's very much at a human core level that we want to be better every day and learn something new. And I say we just need more regenerative humans and the rest will kind of sort itself out. We need to come from a paradigm of how do I make that better? How do I teach our kids to do better today than they did yesterday, whether it be the grades on their maths test or whether it be the way that their attitude is with strangers. Like, we're always trying to make people better today than what they were yesterday. And that is what I believe, going to push us forward as a group of people. Thanks, Deb. I'll move on to Sharon. So they should have crop in all year round. Yeah. So that's what's known as kind of cover cropping or cash cropping, but there should be something growing, giving living roots, not disturbing the soil, and bringing that photosynthesis, capturing the sunlight, feeding the sugars into the soil all year round. And sometimes, for the last few years, it's been very much about putting seeds that just repair the soil. But what people have realized is actually they can use some seeds, mixed seeds. Some of them put 15, 20, 30 different seeds and just scatter it around or drill it into the ground. And it might be radishes or something like that. And they won't harvest the radishes, but then they'll put cattle in behind it. And then the cattle will put on weight much faster because of the fruit salad of food that is there for them. And then they're pushing the ground and aerating it, and the radish is acting like a way of, naturally tilling because it's creating air pockets. So when there's a rain, when the radish dies, it creates a spot for water to sit and infiltrate into the ground. And it's just a win-win-win system. And it blows my mind that there's still so much resistance to it, because when I look at what I see, it's no brainer. Like this is just the way that all farming systems should be. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. So yeah, covering the ground all year round. And that's even in your own back garden, like learning about companion planting and saying, okay, well, I'm going to plant carrots here, but right next to them, I'm going to do a row of broad beans, because broad beans are good at putting nutrients back into the soil. And then, oh, look, there's a weed that's popped up. Researching why that weed's popped up. Okay, it's dandelion. Why do dandelions grow? What soil do they thrive in? Oh, they thrive in compacted soil. Oh, maybe my soil's a bit compacted. So using weeds, what I like to call signal plants. It's our communication above the ground, what's happening below the ground. And when we change our paradigm, we don't pull the weed out. We start being inquisitive and say, why is that there? What's it trying to tell us? And when you fix why it's there, it goes away by itself. All plants have a succession. When they do their job, they leave, And so if we keep pulling it out, the soil never heals itself and never repairs, and we never learn why that's going there. And that's been one of the big paradigm shifts that farmers are starting to realize, is that if their paddocks get filled with dandelion, what does that mean? If there's thistles with deep tap roots, that's a signal that there's compaction, and the roots are trying to get, break the soil down and go really deep into the soil to get moisture. And so leaving them there and naturally going away actually solves the problem of the soil much, much quicker than any human intervention.
But what about, sorry, just to interrupt. So I'm on 5 acres here, and we've got paddocks full of onion weed and cape weed. So if I let that cape weed keep growing, keep flowering, and it's just going to get worse and worse and cover up more of my ground.
Yep. And so I don't know exactly what onion weed and cape weed do, but you need to work out what soils it thrives in, and then that's normally what's missing, and then fixing that. So sometimes removing a weed is about fixing the lime level, and maybe the lime level is about putting legumes in, and so it might be something completely left wing that you don't even think about, and it might be putting another seed in there that helps that grow, that then fix the chemical imbalance, and then that will naturally grow away. The other dilemma and the other disclaimer I'll say is that there are some invasive weeds, and so there are regulations around cancels, and that's where a lot of people get stuck, because they've got the cancel knocking on their door and they're getting reported by the neighbors that they're doing something bad. And that's one of the problems as well. And a lot of councils are starting to change the way that they approach what they call quote unquote invasive weeds. They're only invasive because we don't know how to manage them, because we're throwing more chemicals on it. So it's more human intervention that's making them invasive, because we're not listening to why they're there. We're not observing. Where are you based, Reg? Where are you based? Me? I'm in Sydney. So I'm in Sydney. I was in Melbourne. I left Melbourne for obvious reasons of lockdown and feeling a bit stuck there. But I came to Sydney. I'm in Redfern at the moment. And the farm that we're looking to buy will be probably within about 2 to 3 hours out of New South Wales, out of Sydney, to regenerate that. How do you harvest a good crop with weeds all through it? Yeah, that's the challenge. A lot of the machinery doesn't go through that, and this is where big tech and industrial revolution kind of bangs heads. It is a little bit about running field days and have everyone come and pick their own fruit and leave with a box, and they wait on the way out, and whatever the box has, it's what they pay for, type of thing. But that's where New South Wales at the moment is pushing laws to drop that ability. It will make it more regulated for people to pick your own fruit and farm tours. And I think that is very, very sad for the food movement and being connected to where food comes from. And you zoom out and you look at all the dots and you see exactly why they're doing that, because people being connected to their food is a threat to the big system. Is a worldwide apocalypse event actually what the world needs to regenerate? I have to say yes. At the moment, with the evidence I collect, it is unfortunate that sometimes, these world events, if COVID hasn't kind of already played a big part in it, I think food shortages, petrol prices, the change of the dollar, whatever that looks like, there are a lot more people in this community that have left the cities and pushed land prices through the roof. They want what they call food sovereignty. They want to be able to be off grid, have access to their own food. And that is, I hope we don't get there, but Casey, it wouldn't surprise me that is what will need to happen for people to realize that we didn't listen and we didn't do things. I hope it's preventable. I'm being a bit cheeky, but sometimes I just look out the window and go, well, what do we do? It's very, very hard. And cost of lettuce is at $16 a head, $10 a head, but you can still buy a burger at McDonald's for 99 cents, but it's got lettuce in it. It's like, where are they getting their lettuce from? Or so why are the consumers paying high prices to grow their own food or go to a farmer's market? And I think there are going to be a lot of systems that change. I'm trying to avoid the word collapse lately, because I used to say collapse, and I think, no, we need systems to change. We need to embrace that. We don't want things to collapse. We want things to change, So I think the money system will change soon. I think the way that we buy food will definitely change. The way that we connect and transact is definitely changing as well. People leaving Facebook, social media is struggling. People want, more real life connections and hanging out with like-minded people that fill their cup up rather than feeling them drained. People are working less, working from home. They're trialing the 4-day work week in some places now. People want to spend more time at home and not chasing the money and the big mortgage and the McMansions. What do you think about supermarkets and their plastic tubs of pre-measured cut veggies? Yeah, this is the whole instant gratification consumer convenience lifestyle. I'm a bit torn from this because it's like the plastic, and I think a lot of the supermarkets are going to change. I know that a lot of them now starting to use the cardboard packaging to do that. That'll change with a lot of the carbon net zero targets that'll come out in 2025 and 2030. And I'm torn between this because I want pre-cut vegetables in the supermarket so people don't go through a drive-through. If we want convenience, it needs to look at some end of the scale. And so if it means that pre-cut fruit and food is there, and that's going to make people buy that as opposed to going through a drive-through for the convenience side of things, I think that's better than not. But yes, the amount of plastic in general has just kind of ruined our planet. It should never have been invented, and there's so many alternatives. In fact, a lot of hemp products can be made. Hemp is the next kind of wave of legalizing cannabis is one thing, but the byproduct of hemp, hemp has 5,000 different uses, from clothing to concrete to bricks to fire lighters. We could literally create everything we've created in this world from hemp. And what I learned watching a documentary recently is that hemp was illegal not to grow at one point. Farmers needed to grow hemp to regenerate the land and to create a crop that was fast growing that could be used for food, fuel, and fiber. And then it got rebranded as marijuana and it got legal, became illegal. And, there's a lot of reading between the lines of what you can see has happened. And again, happened all around the 70s and the hippie movement. And there's a documentary somewhere on the internet called Hempsters. It's like hamster, but Hempsters. And it's really, really good to kind of shed some light on how powerful hemp is as a product. And I think we would live in a very different world if hemp was never made illegal. And hempcrete and hemp brick is fire resistant. So there's no risk of places burning down and things like that. That's another, conversation for another day. But plastics from hemp byproduct and things like that is definitely on the cards as well. It needs to be the earth of, is that all the questions? I know the chat keeps going and going. Such good conversation here. I can't wait.
I think there's probably one more in there that is relevant before we wrap up that I think is really good for everyone here because we all eat. And that's from Casey. And she said, I'm guessing not all markets are equal. How do we navigate farmers markets?
Yeah, Maddie's got a great podcast about asking better questions. And I take that on about, we just need to ask better questions, asking the farmer, like, do they use chemicals on their product? Where is the food? So what people don't know is that sometimes people at farmers markets, they're actually going to the wholesale markets, buying a whole heap of tubs and bringing it to a farmer's market and then selling it. They're not actually the farmer. And so, asking those questions like, oh, where is your farm located? How do you choose to grow these foods? Are they biodynamic? Are they organic? Are they regeneratively grown? Asking those type of questions. And if they don't know how to answer it, that's going to tell you a lot about it. Asking whether, they've got photos of their farm, who operates on their farm, is their family involved? What generation are they? Those type of questions are ones. And unfortunately, one of the things that we've kind of lost is taste. We don't know what a great tomato tastes like until we then have a great tomato. But finding that great tomato is a needle in a haystack. And that is I traveled in a camper van in January and I was drinking rainwater a lot. And I didn't realize what town water tasted like until I came back. And I was like, oh my God, I could even smell the chlorine and the toxicity of it. But 2 days later, it's tasted normal. It took only 2 days to undo that 1 month detox, so we forget very quickly what good food tastes like. And that is a problem in itself because we don't have those constant reminders of what a juicy, real apple should taste like, or a good carrot that's grown in great soil that is full of nutrients. So we just have to get ourselves in places. And a lot of people say that organic and naturally grown food is more expensive. I think the question should be like, why is the other food so cheap? And if we're not paying now for premium food, then we pay later for other things like medical, health, supplements, doctor visits, surgeries, and other things. So my biggest thing is like, we go through life, we come with nothing and we leave with nothing. So we end up at a same net position. So whether you pay at the front end or the back end, like that's going to be the same net position. I know not everyone's in situations, but there are a lot of, going into Facebook groups, there's a lot of surplus that's in your own backyard. There's a website called Ripe Near Me that someone, people could put up and say, I've got too many carrots, come and buy them from me at a really discounted price, or let's barter and trade. When you start growing, you start meeting other neighbors who have a surplus of stuff. You say, I've got carrots, you've got apples, let's swap, and that's, I've got eggs from our, home chickens, and you've got beetroots that I need, let's swap. And I think that's going to become more and more. And there's another website, Open Food Network. And so OFN, Open Food Network, and that's basically a website that became really big over COVID because everyone wanted to buy food directly from the farmer. And the farmers' logistic models failed. They couldn't get to farmers markets, so they had to look at ways of selling their produce online. And Open Food Networks was a solution that kind of bridged that marketplace between the farmer with produce and consumers who wanted to buy it. And I keep using the word consumer because I think until we break that, we have to label ourselves as what we are. We consume more than what we need. And the amount of energy that it takes to grow food at the moment is actually much higher than the energy we get from the food that we eat. So it's a out of balance equation. And so I say, if you were going to get paid $1 to go to work for a day, but it cost you $14 to go there, would you go to work? But we're eating food that costs $14 to make, and we only pay $1 for it. It's going to break somewhere. Cool. Well, that's been a fun session. Thank you so much for all this lovely chat and enabling me to sit in my pool of passion and talk about soil.
Thanks so much, Ray. This has been really eye-opening and it's been really great. The chat has just been going crazy, which has been amazing. So I think there's been a lot of really useful stuff to talk about. And then there's obviously 1,000 directions we could take this conversation and whatnot. But I think the important thing is that we're sharing this message and everybody here goes and starts this conversation with someone, which is just like the theme of my podcasts, like you mentioned, which is just asking better questions. It's not telling people what to do. It's not forcing beliefs on people. It's just planting that seed. So thank you so much for coming into the community, sharing your knowledge, wisdom, inspiring everybody here. And yeah, it's been amazing. And for everybody, Ray has his own show called Secrets of the Soil. He's also on How to Not Get Sick and Die on episode 151. So check out that. And any final words before we wrap up, Ray?
Look, yeah, I like what you just said, learn out loud. Don't get overwhelmed by all the moving parts. I know it can be complex. Just take one thing and go deeper in that. Open that mind up for curiosity. And I started digging deep into this world 5-6 years ago, and I haven't stopped. And, just soil is absolutely fascinating. And the more you learn about it, you kind of think, why was this hidden from our education system? And then you kind of go, oh yeah, now I know why. It's not profitable to grow our own food. I grew up in an Italian household where we grew our own food in the backyard. There was no grass. It was just veggie patch on top of veggie patch. So it blows my mind because I didn't realize until I got older that that's not how everyone was, and so the more we learn out loud and we talk to each other and we get to know our communities, go to a community garden, meet everyone, then the world definitely does change.
I remember too, Ray, we were talking maybe a year or two ago about instead of us doing pub crawls, doing regenerative farmer crawls. So just like you said, and inviting people into these worlds. And I really hope that idea happens because we are getting a Consistency Club bus and we're coming.
I would love to do that. I still own the domain name. I think it's like farmcrawl.com.au because I was like, this is awesome. We're going to get a bus. We're going to drive around to farms and then, the red tape gets in the way, public liability and this and that.
Yeah.
Why does all this red tape have to ruin the fun? And that's why, but I definitely recommend, I've been on a lot of farm tours and it's just so eye-opening. And you start realizing you're like, how do you buy a bag of 10 carrots for $1? Like the amount of effort that goes into this, it's just unfair, So, all those big price down campaigns, it's not good for the farmer who's growing it. They've price locked. They're having to sell produce at a loss just to meet their contractual agreement. And the saddest thing is like when the supermarkets don't want it, they have to bin it. They're not even allowed to resell it. It can't even be fed to other animals. There's literally food graveyards. And there was images floating around recently about the avocados in Queensland. And because they're under contract, they're not allowed to sell it to anyone else. So they literally go to food graveyards to just be buried. Food that could feed homeless or feed less fortunate, literally go into rot. Not even put into compost to then be put back into an input. Such a broken system, but these conversation is going to what sparks change where people get to say this is not right, and when we can't wait for legislation or regulations or things to be governed by our quote unquote leaders. It ain't going to happen. We need to be the change that we want to see.
Yes, I love that. And we vote with our dollar. So for those of us that can afford to go to the farmer's market, and even myself, even when I go to the farmer's market, I still look for all the cheapest stuff. I'm just at the farmer's market, right? So you can still be economic about the way you spend. And I think too, when you're eating nutrient-dense food, your satiation and being full happens more effectively. So you're less likely to need to eat more. But anyway, we could talk about this forever. So I know everybody's wanting to sign off. I just want to see from everyone 2 thumbs up. Have you enjoyed this conversation, this presentation? Amazing, right? It's mind-melting stuff. So again, Ray, so grateful. Thank you so much. Appreciate everybody being here and all the questions. And if you've got any more questions, chuck them in the Slack channel and I'll send them over to Ray or we'll add him to the Slack channel, one or the other. All right, let's wrap up. Good night. Thanks so much again, Ray, and we'll chat to everybody soon.
Yep, awesome. So get outside, get your hands dirty and keep digging deeper into a wonderful world of soils.
Thanks, Ray.
Amazing.
Bye, Maddie.
Yeah. Well, soil lovers, that's enough secrets for one episode. I really hope that you enjoyed all the secrets shared during this conversation. But hey, let's not keep it a secret. Please share this podcast around and make sure that you like it and leave us a review, because that really helps spread the secrets of the soil. Until next time, remember, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils.